Good afternoon and a warm welcome to today's launching of Sympto, the Syriac Thesaurus beta number 2. For those who don't know me, I'm Sabine Schmidt, the permanent faculty at the School of Historical Studies representing Near Eastern Studies. And co-hosting today's event with me is Maria Mercedes Tuya, representing Digital Scholarship at the IAS, and George Kiras, the founding director of Beit Mauduto.
We're very glad that you could join us. Growth is always good, so I am really looking forward to seeing what this new version will give us. A bit of housekeeping, the meeting is being recorded. Questions or comments will be addressed after the presentations. Please submit that in the chat and address to all, even during the presentations while the presentations are going. Due to the number of attendees that are going to be joining us, we cannot acknowledge the raised hands. George, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Sabine. Thank you, Maria. Thank you for co-hosting with Mauduto the launch of Symtho Beta 2. So we're still in beta version. I will say a few words in the beginning, and then we will move to the presentations. Firstly, I would like, if we can go to the next slide, I would like to thank our supporters for this project. This project began with the summer program in the digital humanities. And you see on the screen the folks, usually from the Syriac churches, the Syriac communities, who are supporting the summer program in the digital humanities at Beit Mauduto. But for a big project like this, having a fellow throughout the year is very important. And we are grateful to the Herman and Mary K. Seibel Foundation for providing us, at least for the last 3 years, with a generous grant to have a throughout the year a student who is our digital humanities fellow. And in the next slide, we will see the team that made basically constitutes all the work that is being done at Beit Mauduto. You see the Seibel Fellows on the top, and Slavo is on our upper right corner. You will hear from him later on. He's our corpus specialist. So it's thanks to him that we are able to build this with the software. You will also see all the digital humanities fellows throughout the last 3 years who worked during the summers at Beit Mauduto. Also, every year we get 2 to 4 PTS, Princeton Theological Seminary field education interns who work on various projects. Brandon is one of them, and you will be hearing from Brandon. And also we have a number of volunteers. So as you could see, this is really a teamwork and the product of all these young, now I can say young people. So if we can go to the next slide, please. What is Symtho? Well, the word Symptho shares with the English word thesaurus, which obviously comes from Latin, the meaning of treasure. Well, the software that you will see is called No Sketch Engine, which is the free copy of Sketch Engine. It is a corpus management software. So Symptho is a corpus query platform, basically. When I was studying with Sebastian, I remember in 1990, I was editing the text, the Acts of St. George, from a British manuscript library. And when I was writing the preface, Sebastian taught me something that I kept throughout all my publications. He said, the first thing that you want to tell the reader is what the book is not about. So this is what I'm going to tell you now, what Symtho is not. Symtho is not a publishing platform that is to publish corpora or born digital texts. For that, in the field of Syriac studies, we have a very good platform, the SyriacCorpus.org. The general editor is Jamie Walters, and the founding editors are David Taylor and Christian Heal. And also we have domain-specific corpora that are coming up, such as the Hunain.net. Gregory Castle, I believe, is leading that effort. And there's a new platform that will be coming up, the Syriac Anaphoras, and Ephraim Ishaq will be leading that. So for the publication of corpora, one would go to these platforms. Another thing that Symtho does not give you 100% accurate texts. Most of the texts in Symtho are OCR'd. That means they are machine read. And with that, obviously, comes errors. Although our rates of the percentage of error is low, our accuracy is in the high 90s, but still that means you don't have 100% accurate text. And sometimes some of the texts are typed, and even when they're typed, there could be typos. So keep that in mind when you use it for corpus query. If we can go to the next slide, I will go briefly throughout the timeline of the project. So the project began in 2017. Well, the project didn't begin in 2017. Actually, the project itself is an accident. 2017, we had fellows in the digital humanities, Emily Cheesley, who's now in Princeton, Jillian Mark Antonio, who's now a graduate student at Duke, and Abigail. You will hear from Abby. She's a graduate student at Exeter. And their task was to test the accuracy of an OCR engine by Google called Tesseract. And Syriac worked pretty well there, but Tesseract didn't have a user interface, so changing it was not easy for us. Building new OCR models for Syriac was not easy for us, so we left it at that. And then throughout the following year, Abby came across Transkribus, which has a nice user interface that allows you to train OCR models. So Abby suggested, why don't we work the following summer on Transkribus? And Abby and other digital humanities fellows did that. And there was great success. And that kind of gave us the idea to start dumping texts onto these OCR engines. So if you want to blame anybody for Symtho, blame Abby. So thank you, Abby, for suggesting that we start with Transkribus. And then the summer fellows were not sufficient, obviously, and we are very lucky and grateful for the Cybele Fellowship and its funding, because that gave us the possibility to have a fellow throughout the entire year. And we had Johan, who will also talk to you. He was a Cybele Fellow. Shelby was a Cybele Fellow as well, and also you will be hearing from her. So before we go and to the speakers, I just want to show you a demo of 2-3 simple searches. So maybe I can share the screen now. So here is the website of the new Symtho. Maybe Slavo can put the URL for you on the chat. This will become the default one in a couple of days. So basically, the Symtho beta 1 is the top one, which had 6 million words, and beta 2. We just learned this morning it's not 13 million words, it's just under 13. So that was a big lie when we said 13 million words. We have a few duplicates in there. So it's 12 million something, almost 13,000 words. So I'm going to open it, and you go to a concordance, and I'm just going to type the word Melko for king and search. And the results will come soon, hopefully. We have 15,000 hits. And you can, go down. This is Zechariah Scholasticus, and this is the Acts of Severus. If you click here, you will see all the metadata about this particular text. I can change it if I want the plural Melko. This is very important for people who use the system. Our siome are always on the last character by default. by convention, actually. This way we all agree where Suomi is, because Suomi could be anywhere on the word. It is always on the last character in Symtho. So this is the plural. And then if I want prefixes, I could say, I could put a star here, for example. That means any character before it. Then I have Dumelko, Bumelko, and Slavo later on is going to give you more sophisticated and more fun types of searches. We built something with for Syriac roots, and he will show you that later on. You could also search for phrases. So if I search for a phrase, Bethfroso, and click search here, there's only one hit because it's a modern term, obviously, and it's in an introduction by Sebastian Brock, although Sebastian just told me that Mor Polikarpos is the author, so this should be pseudo Sebastian Brock. But this is basically how you will be searching for this, and we will see other examples throughout the presentations. So I will stop sharing now, and I will hand it to Johan. Our speakers today will be Johan, who's at the University of Cambridge now, a postdoc with Jeffrey Kahn. He was a Seibel Fellow. Then Abby and Brandon will talk about the OCR modules. Abby is a PhD student at Exeter. She was a summer digital humanities fellow at Beth Mardutho, and Brandon started as a Princeton Theological Seminary field education intern and was also a Seibel Fellow, or is currently actually, is our currently the Seibel Fellow for this year. Shelby then, she was formerly at Fuller and she's a student of our Beth Mardutho courses. Basically everybody, apart from Johan, I think, is a student of our Beth Mardutho courses. And Shelby fell into the Beth Mardutho black hole. So now she manages a lot of most of our projects. And then Slavo is from the Austrian Academy of Science. He also fell into the Beth Mardutho black hole, spending hours and hours in building the corpus through the no sketch engine. So thank you very much, everybody. And now I will hand it to Johan.
Thank you, George. So I'm just going to tell you briefly about the first, say, 6 months of the Symtho project. As you heard, the project started in George's mind and with some of the other summer fellows long before I came on the project in 2019. But I started working on the Symtho project, can't remember, it might have been late February, early March in 2019. And the first things we tried to do was just figuring out what tools are available, how could they be used, which ones should we use, and using these tools, basically what did we need to do next, or what should we do next? And as you've already heard, we figured out fairly soon that we wanted to use no sketch engine. And I spent some of my time beginning just figuring out how does sketch engine work, doing tutorials and other things to see what could we create using this tool. So next step, page, Shelby. So using no sketch engine, we basically had 3 goals early on. So we wanted to create or have an accurate text and as large a text sample as possible. We wanted metadata to make the searches in the Symtho more useful and helpful for scholars and everyone really interested in Syriac. And then we also wanted parts of speech tagging. So I'm going to tell you some more about the first 2 of these, and Shelby is going to tell you much more about the metadata. So I won't steal her fire. But if you can move to the next slide. The first thing we wanted to do was having a large text sample. And to achieve that, we created OCR models, or more accurately, William Cloxon created OCR models, and I led the team in improving these models with William's help. So we had 3 text types, S monotype, S14, and SAT. And these are simply codes for different print types. Print types that I believe it was Coakley who created these names, but yeah, we basically used them. We had a large number of texts that we had scanned, books with these 3 different types. And so William Cloxon started by creating models of reading these types. He looked at the characters and did all the coding and everything that needed to go into the OCR models. And then he would process a large number of texts and he would send these texts to us. And the workflow or the work cycle was basically like this. William sent us the texts, and then I and the team started looking through these texts. I'm sure that Shelby, especially, who worked with me early on, remember these first steps, going through the texts, looking for missing and misread letters, looking for spacing and punctuation errors. And really, in the beginning, we looked for any errors we could find and fed everything back to William, who would tell us, okay, these missing letters, I can do something about it, or I can't do anything about it. This thing has nothing to do with my model. It's a problem with the scan, or the ink in the original volume was faded. So we started that process, feeding back. He would improve his model, and then it would be back to us. And say that one week I worked on the S monotype model, I would feed him the mistakes. And while he worked on improving that model, the next week I would work on S14 or SAT. And we would move back and forth like that, switching between models and other things. And by the middle of summer 2019, or sometime in late June, mid-July, we had a fairly accurate model available for all these 3 text types. And that's when, well, we'd really started collecting metadata before that. So Shelby, if you move to the next slide. At this point, we'd already started figuring out or thinking about what kind of metadata do we want. But at this point, once we started to have an accurate text, and once we got the summer fellows of that year, we really started in earnest in figuring out what metadata we wanted and needed, beginning the process of mining these various books for this metadata, and not just the books, but other sources if the data wasn't in the books themselves. And also trying to figure out what do we need to do if we want to get this metadata into our text files and eventually make Symtho or no sketch engine give us the data we want when we do these searches. So in the first 6 months, these were the main 2 things that we did. We worked on creating this text, and we also collected metadata. And if you move to the last slide, Shelby. In the last couple of months that I worked on the Symtho project, we started also thinking about what are the other texts that we want to add, and how can we streamline the process of adding new texts and adding these texts. And I'm sure that the rest of the team, Shelby and Brandon and others, have streamlined this process since, and they probably scrapped many of the things that we thought we were going to do in the process. And so those were some of the things we were thinking about. Secretly, in my heart, I was asking this last question: part of speech tagging anytime soon? When we started the project, I had high hopes of getting parts of speech tagging, but it quickly became obvious that we were not going to see that in the first 6 months. However, as Slav was going to tell you about later, we are getting closer to that stage right now. But before you hear more about parts of speech tagging, Abby and Brandon and Shelby are going to tell you more about Transkribus and eScriptorium and metadata. So the floor is yours, Abby.
Thank you, Johan. Yeah, so as George said, in the summer of 2018, we decided that we were going to try and train some new OCR models for Syriac, and we chose the program Transkribus to do that. So I'm just going to talk you really briefly through the process of making the models. Transkribus is a software program that has the potential to make OCR models for any language or any script. And it can also work with either printed or handwritten documents. So initially, a team of just 2 of us set out with the aim to make a model for each of the 3 Syriac scripts. And we decided to focus on handwritten text, as that hadn't really been done before. So if we could have the next slide, Shelby. So there you'll see a screenshot of the user interface in Transkribus. And the actual training of the model is kind of an automated process that goes on behind the scenes in Transkribus. But to get to that stage, you need to provide the program with enough material for the model to learn from. So we call this training data. And training data basically consists of images of the type of text you want the model to recognize, with accompanying transcriptions that you've checked and checked again for accuracy. And it's recommended that you need between 5,000 and 15,000 words of training data for a model in Transkribus. The lower end is for printed text, and the higher end is for handwritten texts. So obviously we were aiming for about 15,000 words of training data for each of the Syriac scripts. So if we could have the next slide again, Shelby. And there you'll see some of the types of images that we used as part of our training data. Now, to find suitable images, we went to the websites of large collections like the British Library and the Vatican Library, because there they have already digitized a lot of their Syriac manuscripts. So we could just download the images straight to our computers, which made it nice and easy. And they were also fairly high quality, which is good for making models. Once you've chosen the images that you want to use, the next part of the process is to perform a layout analysis on them. So when you do a layout analysis, you're basically identifying the different regions of text in the image, such as columns and lines within those columns. So if we could have the next slide again, Shelby, you'll see some of the some screenshots of that process. And Transkribus has an automated tool for doing the layout analysis. And we found that it worked quite well, but if you're working with a corpus that has a more unconventional layout, you might find that you need to do more manual checking of the layout analysis. And basically what this does is it creates a map of the image so that when you come to put your transcription in, the program knows exactly where on the image it corresponds to. And once the layout analysis is complete, you can start working on your transcriptions. Obviously, this is the bulk of the work for any model training. To speed up the process, I focused on manuscripts that contained books of the Bible, because this meant that I could actually copy and paste ready-made transcriptions from elsewhere, which is very lazy, I know. There was still a manual element because I had to check that punctuation and vowel points were in the same place in the transcription as they were in the manuscript. But overall, I think that it was quicker to do it that way than to type everything out totally manually. And once the training data is ready, you can start to create models. And like I said, this happens kind of behind the scenes in the Transkribus program. But what you can do is you can set aside some of the data you've made as test data rather than training data. And this means that it won't be used by the model to learn from. But when the model is ready, it will attempt to transcribe those test pages. And the transcription produced by the model will be compared to the transcription you have provided. And any differences will be used to calculate an accuracy rating. So if we could have the next slide again, Shelby, you will see the results of our models. So this was after a little bit of experimentation with exactly what went in, but the models that we now offer through the Beth Mardufo website recognize between 95 and 98% of the characters on the test pages accurately, which we were really happy with for handwritten text. And like I said, those are available to be shared through Transkribus. So if you would like to use them, I can share them with you. Just go to the website to find out how. But unfortunately, Transkribus is no longer a completely free service like it was when we first started using it. I think you get 500 pages free now, but anything on top of that you have to pay for. So we're going to look at some different options for OCR models, and I'll hand you over to Brandon now as he is going to talk about those.
All right, hello. I started with Beth Mardufo doing the Symtho project, as George said, last, well, the fall of 2019, but we did a lot of our work last summer. And I took over from what Abby had with the models with Transkribus. And we tried to do as much as we could until they started charging. And then once we knew that was happening, we started to look elsewhere. So in the winter, the winter of January, George and I went to Princeton University to hear a talk about eScriptorium, and they walked us through it. So that is then what we decided to move to. So other than the cost pushing us towards another way of running OCR, there were a few other reasons. So some of the pros and cons for Transkribus is really easy to train. You have, you put in your ground truth and then you can run the training whenever you so choose. One issue of eScriptorium is that since it is an interface for the Kraken OCR system, and we're using it on someone else's server, the eScriptorium server, we are not able to train it ourselves. So we have to go through them, let them know when we have enough data prepared to run. And then another pro of Transkribus is that there are multiple ways you can export your outputs. This includes XML, pure text, the images, and also Word documents. The eScriptorium has all of those, except it doesn't give you the option of outputting in a Word document. But as long as you have the pure text, if you really want it in a Word file, it's fairly easy to just copy and paste it as such. You can also easily organize your files on the Transkribus platform. You can create folders and then see all on the left side of the pane, all the text that you can access. Unfortunately, with eScriptorium, you just simply have one page of where all your texts are and you can't organize them and you can't search for them. You just have to click next, 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 page by page, because they only have about 15 of your documents on a single page. And then lastly, as Abby said, Transkribus works with any language that you can input, and a lot of people already use it, and have already created models for other languages. So if you're looking at doing stuff other than Syriac, a lot of the work will already be completed for you, especially with popular languages. And then the cons, which pushed us away, is you can only upload text as images. This will be something I'll talk about with the eScriptorium of how we can move a lot faster and process more text, because we don't have to take the time of converting a PDF to image files and then wait for them to upload. The worst thing about Transkribus, I think, when we moved especially, is that the models themselves belong to Transkribus. So you can't export them. We had to start from scratch yet again to train models for eScriptorium. We at least could export and use our data, so the images and the XML files, so that we didn't have to completely create new ground truths. But it would have been nice if we could have taken the models themselves with us already. The line editing tools is a little annoying at times. The main thing I ran into is whenever I would get to the end of a line, it would automatically change my language input on my computer back to English or Hebrew instead of sticking with Syriac. As we said now a few times, the user fees. And then also lastly, when we worked with it over the summer, it didn't work well with volunteers who were using Macs. They may have fixed this solution in the meantime because they were aware of it, but really only Windows systems worked well with Transkribus. Next slide, please, Shelby. So moving to eScriptorium, it's powered by Kraken, which a con of that is Kraken itself only works on Macs and Linux machines. However, with using the interface through Mozilla Firefox, you are able to use eScriptorium on any computer. The one thing that's better for us is we can process the files more quickly. So PDFs themselves can be uploaded. And then also you can train how the segmentation is done for regions. So what this means is we only want the Syriac text from documents, and we can tell it to cut out then running headers, to cut out the footnotes, and to simply ignore them so that we don't have to go through manually and delete those lines during the segmentation. So what this then means is once the model is approved and good to go, we simply just drop the files in, they get processed using scripts, and then we get our output right away. So, well, once it's finished process. With creating ground truth and previously with Transkribus, we would have had to upload individual texts, process them, check them, process the OCR and check. But now we can do it more quickly once the model is good to go. The line editing also pops out into a dialog box so you can more easily see where you are at on the page. One of the bigger things is that models can be exported from eScriptorium so that we can share models for people to import them into other OCR systems. And there is also no user fees with eScriptorium. One downside is to zoom in and out of a page, you use the scrolling up and down feature, and so it's very finicky and takes a lot of practice. And as I already said, your files, when you have a bunch of documents that you are processing like we are, it takes a bit of time to find the one you're looking for. Next slide, please. So when you go to eScriptorium, this is what you would find. As you can see, if you really focus, you have the 3 steps in processing a page in the image that they provide. You have the manuscript, and then with the segmentation done, and finally the OCR output. The nice thing about eScriptorium, Shelby, if you want to go to the last slide, please, is that it gives you multiple ways of viewing your page. So on the left is the original image with the region and line segmentation done. In the middle is the output so that it looks like what the page is like. And then on the far right is how Transkribus also did how you edit the text, in that it just simply gives you the line, and it gives the text in line order and not necessarily where it is on the page. So it's another way of how the middle one will show you exactly what it looks like on a page. And that's what Transkribus is lacking, whereas the right is just simply the output in line number. So say we would have a 2-column text, the middle column here would show you the actual 2-column text. And then on the right, which is also the Transkribus similar interface, would just simply be one really long single column based on the line numbers. Lastly, then, with this, since eScriptorium runs on Kraken, we are ourselves currently working on having our own interface and using the website, our server, that's the word I wanted. And so that we'll be using the very similar interface of eScriptorium, but we'll have complete control over everything. And now, Shelby, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Brandon. Okay, so as Johan said, we started in 2019 looking at William Clarkson's models and gathering metadata, and that was the very beginning. And since then, obviously, the OCR process has left my hands, and I have concentrated on metadata and creating a database. So as Johan said, we wanted to select the most useful elements for our metadata so that we would have a great searchability. And this meant choosing obvious elements like author and title, but it also meant choosing many other less obvious metadata elements. And so we needed volunteers. We started with 4, but eventually had more fellows and volunteers gathering and inputting data into a spreadsheet. And this enabled us to gather more metadata more quickly. However, with multiple people, we increased variability in style and spelling and naming conventions. And so this meant we had numerous reviews of our data was necessary. So we thought we needed to create our metadata collected in a live dynamic database that would become a repository. And so using Google Sheets and Google Scripts, I created what is our current metadata database. And this is still, Slava will attest to, a work in progress. Next, hold on. So the work in progress is a work of refining the metadata for consistency and accuracy. As I said, we had some naming issues. We found that we had Jacob spelled Jacob, Yakub, however many different ways we could. Spacing, if the computer has a space or a period, those all show up as something different. You can see from the screenshot that there was one source that was marked as both acts and chronicles, and so we needed to go through everything to make sure that our metadata was consistent and accurate. And so this meant that I added data validations, drop-down menus, trying to control what could be inputted into the metadata database. So you don't have variant in spelling or capitalization or any other kind of styles. We also wanted to verify the accuracy of our dates and genres, and with the help of Sebastian Brock and many emails back and forth, we have been in the process of doing that as well. And this process of refining has, as Johan alluded to earlier, has helped us to decide what we wanted to keep, what we didn't want to keep, which elements were the most important. And so these elements, in order to get them into the files, became attributes of our document tag. And so these are some of the ones that we have in the system now. And if you go to our new interface, you can click on corpus info and they'll give you the list that's on the right of your screen. It's all the different attributes that we have now. obviously the author and the working title were really important, and we knew that we needed to standardize those names. And we also created working titles for each document in our corpus, and we standardized those as well. And then we created a unique doc ID to identify each work separately. And this was created by making a standardized abbreviation for every author and a standardized abbreviation for every work, and then putting them together with a colon so that each document in the corpus has its own unique identifier. And these are all aids in searches. And so then we also knew that we wanted to be able to search by date. So we created 2 more attributes, one period, which is the century or centuries in which a work was written. And then to enhance that, we created the epoch, which is it's a 4-digit 0 padded number that's for the computer, referring to the work's estimated composition year. So if we knew the year, we just used the given that year. But more often, the year was estimated from the known period using quarter century marks. So for example, if you have a period of 1 or 2 centuries, then the epoch was estimated to the middle of that century. Here I have 6th century, the period, and then the epoch would be 0550. If the period was a single century and there was a reference to early, mid, or late, then we used the quarters 25, 50, and 75 respectively. If the period was longer, if it was 3 or more centuries, then the epoch was estimated to the latest 3rd quarter of the century. So here the example is 6th through 9th century period equals a 0875 epoch. We also sometimes used the author's year of death if that was known to estimate the epoch. So and we just estimated to the nearest quarter century preceding the year of death. So if, for example, they died in 1667, then the epoch would be 1650. If there was just no certainty about the period, we marked both attributes with date uncertain. And then in the case of texts that were originally Greek, if the Syriac translator was known, we used the period and the epoch to represent the Syriac translation. If not, then we went with the period and the epoch for the Greek composition. And we also added varied genres. So we have basic genres, but then we created more nuanced categories in our genre type so that you could do a search across letters or commentaries or compare a narrative versus a dialogue poem. We also included the attribute of a Syriac genre. So if you wanted to look at all Midrashe or Memra, something like that, you could do any kind of combination of these different attributes, and that will just help in your search. We also decided that it would be good to add things that will help us know who was the early editor or the editor or the translator. So if, for example, you wanted to look for all the things edited by Bejan, you could do that. And I have a couple screenshots here. So if you were looking for the use of Kothobo in any words by Abba Isaiah or whoever from the 3rd century, you could pick each one of those categories, and then you would type that in here, use these boxes to select, and this would be your output. And then as George showed, you could click on the eye over here and your metadata comes out. And then here's another example, if I can get it to work. Yeah, so, and so this is just the importance of metadata is that it enables our searches. It helps us to better assess what we have already in the corpus. We are looking to see if we wanted to know what works we have edited by Bejan, we can do a simple search, and then we can go through and look and see what we need to add. It makes our use of sources more effective. And as I described earlier, you can make more nuanced searches that are tailor-made to your research, creating sub-corpora that will fit what your data needs. And again, this makes everything a quicker, more useful result. And then finally, just ongoing things for metadata. It's just a matter of improving, and refining the categories, expanding the categories, things that will be helpful for people in their searches, correcting, refining mistakes, and then again, enhancing the database itself. And then I'm going to let Slava go on to the next thing.
Thank you, Shelby. Can everybody hear me? Because my computer has been wonky. Good. Thank you, George. So the work on metadata that Shelby has just described is incredibly important for the various purposes that we intend to put the corpus to use. Now, what I'm going to be talking about is the other kind of metadata, more the linguistic kind of it. Basically adding information about the text, the language itself. Now, obviously, this sort of metadata, this sort of linguistic tagging is necessary for various purposes we want to put the corpus to use for, like linguistic analysis, but also even more efficient search. And of course, there's always the serendipity that is involved in any type of corpus work. When I talk about linguistic tagging, it isn't just part of speech tagging, but it actually consists of a bunch of things that are interrelated. And these involve, at least what we're working on right now, is these involve sentence splitting, tokenization, lemmatization, part of speech tagging itself, and various kinds of semantic shenanigans. I'll be discussing those briefly in detail. Next slide, please. So one of the major challenges for any ancient language is sentence splitting. That basically means splitting like continuous text into chunks based on some sort of semantic or syntactic criteria, something that we would refer to as a sentence, because this has ramifications for all the other kinds of stuff. For example, syntactic analysis. Now, the problem here is that there are no formal criteria as in a modern language, so there is no punctuation, and if it is very inconsistent. The other big problem is, of course, we don't even know what a sentence or what a sentence even is. There's a famous definition that has like 230 different examples. So that's another thing. And of course, if you want to do something more in depth, as we have done on the Hunai.net project, you actually need to look at the syntactic or semantic analysis and do that sort of thing manually, and that is very laborious. And there's, of course, the final problem, which has to do with the definition of a sentence. What is it you want to split your text into? Should it be smaller chunks or centered around a verb, or something much larger? So once we finish the presentation and we get to the demo, I can show you some examples of the kind of work I've been doing on that front. Next slide, please. One of the major challenges that we are currently facing that has ramifications for just about everything linguistic when it comes to Syriac is tokenization and or lemmatization, which basically means splitting what we have orthographically, the orthographic word, into its constituent units. Now, this by and large involves morphological analysis, which is computationally incredibly difficult, even in the age of AI. But there's also like conceptual problems. How would you even define token for a purpose of tokenization? I have a few examples there, which are a bit muddled. But in the first case, we're looking at least 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, or maybe even more morphemes. So how would you define those? Would you define the dalet or the bet as separate tokens? What would you do with the object pronouns, or with the possessive pronoun rather? Will it have the same status as the uta suffix? So there's a difference here between derivational and flective morphology. So those are questions that kind of need to be answered even for the technical purposes. And those, of course, involve engagement with questions of morphology and morphosyntax. Then there's the problem of the content nature of Syriac. I mean, how do you even define what a lemma is? Look at the word maskanota. It's obviously borrowing from Arabic because there is no simchat kof nun root. So what would you consider a lemma here? Would that be maskana, or however you define that? And what will you do with all the Greek words and all the Persian words and all the Akkadian words? How would you define their composition? So that's something that needs to have a very good and very firm grounding in the linguistic description of Syriac for the purposes of annotation and then future computational work. And don't get me started about roots. How do you even define a root for a Greek word, for example? So next slide, please. Now, the part of speech itself, there has been some progress on this, also requires dealing with the challenges that I described before. and extra because essentially we're talking about a morphosyntactic description. I have done some theoretical work on this, a paper coming out soon, where I'm basically looking at some of the word classes and the way they've been treated in grammars, and even the best grammars of Syriac kind of don't have too much to say about like minor classes like prepositions and conjunctions. So right now, there's basically two major ways in which we look at part of speech tagging and this morphosyntactic analysis in Syriac. This is one of them. This is actually taken from Cedra, but modified little according to the universal dependencies format CONLU. You'll see a different version of this in a moment. So this is one way of assigning part of speech to words. As you can see, there are a few categories. For example, there's just verb, nothing else. The auxiliary category, the AUX, is a bit of a fishy one, and there's no distinction, for example, between various types of nouns and pronouns. In contrast to this, next slide, please. There's been a lot of work done on the Gregory project, which we adopted on the Hunainen project in terms of lemmatization and part of speech tagging. So this is a sample of how they do it. They chose a bit of a different approach. So for example, on one hand, they conflate all the minor word classes like conjunctions and prepositions into particles. But on the other, they have a kind of elaborate system of division of pronouns. So personal pronouns, demonstrative pronouns, possessive pronouns, and so forth. And as you can see on the very last line, they also classify individual derived stems as separate part of speeches, which is something that's not even done in Arabic or Hebrew or Semitic languages in general. So this is an interesting way of approaching this. But it just goes to show you how differently can these problems be dealt with. And the next slide. That's my favorite part. This is all kinds of semantic shenanigans, as I referred to previously. They basically involve two major things, and they are named entity recognition. So that means names of people, names of places, which would be extremely useful to link Symtho with the databases like Siri.ac that we have, and provide other ways in which people can access information straight from Symtho. And then there's, of course, other semantic work that can tremendously help in, for example, lexicographic work. What you see are the examples of like one of these cutting edge things, word vectors, using GenSym, where basically we automatically calculate the use of how words are used, and thus end up with a list of synonyms, antonyms, and various types of words that stand in various kinds of semantic relations to each other. And is there one more slide for me? So if I could, can I switch to controlling my own screen? There we go. So here is again the new interface with the new Symtho, the 13 million or something words. But the other option that you have here is using the old Symtho, which I have adapted, for which I provided some sort of linguistic annotation, especially in two different areas. So one of those areas is part of speech tagging. So if I were to search for a word with the setup currently provided in this version of Symtho, and I'm going to go here so as not to spoil it. What you would see is underneath every word, you would see it's part of speech tag. This is taken directly from Cedra. So basically, I use Cedra to teach the computer how to recognize parts of speech. Now, as you can see, it does not do that very well. So you can see right here that it does not recognize the name of King Abgar, but rather thinks it's a verb. Quite understandable. But in other instances, it performs actually quite well. So this is something that we plan to implement very soon in on the current version of Symtho. Of course, it still depends on how we decide to approach the entire thing. The other thing that I have implemented here, and is to a certain extent implemented in the new Symtho, is the sentence view. So once again, using the same data from Cedro, I trained a model, basically taught a computer how to recognize, well, sentences. The problem with Cedro, of course, is that it's not divided into sentences, but rather verses. So in some cases, it performs very well, but basically identifying clauses. In other cases, and I think that's how you can get to the, well, it's not probably here. So in other cases, it will just basically give you the entire paragraph or even like a half a text because it's, doesn't have any information to go on. So this and some other things we plan to have in the official Symtho soon. And now the two things that I would like to show you that George already advertised is a way of dealing with the morphological variation in Syriac until we have like morphological analysis in place. By that time, you would be able to search for a lemma or for a root. Now, if you go to the advanced search and choose the phrase and enter a root here, it's not my keyboard. There we go. Choose this one. What you can do by selecting one of the options here, you can basically tell Symtho to look for all these derivations. So for example, let's have the prefixes, let's have the imperfect, let's go for some reflexive. If you click here, a regular expression, so one of those complicated things for search, will be automatically copied here to the phrase input field. And if you just click on go, you will see all.
Slavo, I think we lost your audio. So what Slavo is showing basically is you can click on a word and it will take you to Cedra. So most of the words in the context there, you can just click on them and it will take you to Cedra for the lexical definition. While we wait for Slavo to come back with the audio, what he just showed you basically where you type a root and you choose perfect or imperfect and whatnot. Of course, if you knew regular expressions, you could have come up with that term yourself. But we know that many people don't know regular expressions, and that's why we added it. Although I encourage everybody to go and learn regular expressions. They're very good for your life.
So this is actually the penultimate thing that I wanted to talk about. And so if there's any questions, I'll be happy to answer them. And finally, there is this little nifty thing that I will also update very soon. And it's one of those things that I described as, things for morphological analysis, so for semantic analysis. So you can basically enter any word here. And based on a model that I trained, it will show you its close.
So I will be the Mfashkana of Slavo. It will show you basically a map of that word, but which other words in the corpus are close to it. So yes, Slavo is shaking his head, so I'm saying the right thing. So basically, yeah, it's kind of a semantic map of things that will be close to that particular word with some data. Good. Thank you so much, Slavo. In our next section, we have three generations of scholars who will be giving us their feedback on their usage of Symtho. Obviously, they're going to give us their feedback on the first version of Symtho, not what you saw now. So we will start with Sebastian, and we all know Sebastian. He is the former reader of Aramaic and Syriac at Oxford. And then we will move after Sebastian to Jack Tannous, who is a professor in history at Princeton University. And Jack recently got tenure. So congratulations, Jack. Axios, Axios, Axios. And then we will move to Hannah. Hannah was a student at Beth Mardutho, studying Syriac. Then she became a digital humanities fellow in one of the summers. And now she's a graduate student at Yale University. So we'll start with Sebastian, then to Jack, then to Hannah. It's all yours, Sebastian.
Right. Well, congratulations. This is fascinating. And it's wonderful to welcome the Syriac equivalent of the Thesaurus Linguae Graecae, which is a tool that is really invaluable. And I already found that Symtho is really invaluable. I'll just say a few things about areas that I found it particularly useful. On a couple of occasions, I found myself cataloging very small fragments of old manuscripts. And this was unfortunately before Symtho came into existence. And I realized it would have saved me hours and hours of time searching through texts for identifying them. And in fact, I had to leave in both cases quite a number of things unidentified. But I tried last night with the new version, and two very small fragments which just had one word and beginning of the next word. And the one word was not one that was going to produce 5,000 examples, but say 200. And running through what Symtho produced for that, I was able to identify these two really measly fragments. One turned out to be from Jacobus Sarug, which was nice, and the other, rather surprisingly, was from 1 Corinthians. But since there was, it would have only been by chance that one would have caught it, and it was well, very exciting to be able to add these to my catalogue. And so for identifying things, this is absolutely fabulous. And another place where it will be incredibly useful is for people who are cataloging for the HMML materials, because an awful lot of those are unidentified text, the beginning or the end is lost. And just to enter something characteristic in Symtho, that will almost certainly produce the right identification. So that is going to be incredibly useful. It'll also be very useful for a large number of texts which are already published, which haven't been identified, or maybe they've been misidentified. And this will be a way of securing their proper identification. Now, one of my many interests is in, as some of you know, in these adjectival forms ending in aya, and the chronological development of these. I found it very useful checking in Symtho to make sure that I haven't made a terrible mistake and that I've said something only appears in the 6th century when there it is hiding away in some 4th century text that I happen not to have read. I have read a huge amount of things collecting this material, but one always misses some things. So that's another very important area. An area that I think is going to be very helpful is in isolating authorial preferences. I happen to have come across this quite by chance. As many of you know, there are 2 Bar Chad B'Shabbos, and the question is, are there 2 or is it just one person? The tendency nowadays is to say that there's only one, but I'm pretty sure on this sort of evidence that there are actually 2. but one would need to have a lot of material, and I haven't had time to go into that. So those are just some of the areas where I think Symtho is going to be absolutely invaluable. So thank you, George. Thank you, everyone who's put a huge amount of work into this. It really is a huge advantage and advance in Syriac studies. So over to Jack.
Thanks, Sebastian. I just want to say thanks to George and the whole team. This is absolutely phenomenal. It's a dream to have something like this. It's really, I said before this started publicly, you're making Syriac the envy of a lot of other fields right now. So let me say a few things here. So have to admit that I'm not very computer savvy, and I think I can probably appreciate about 1 to 2% of what Symtho can do. Like I wasn't sure what Slava was talking about half the time, but I'm sure if I figure that out, like that's even gonna magnify what you can do with this. In general, what I like about Symtho so much is that it can make possible to do in only a few seconds what previously would have taken years to do, right? So I often find myself getting obsessed with particular words or phrases and trying to track those across bodies of literature. And so like I spent a huge amount of time trying to find the word tayoyo and in pre-Islamic Syriac material, the word Rumaye, Romans or Rumaya, Roman, Lemahdo, which Sebastian brought attention to many years ago in an article, trying to track these specific phrases. And I've spent years on some of them, like a stamp collector, trying to find evidence for these things. You can do this now with Symtho, like as fast as you type and hit enter. And it's absolutely amazing. And I was like, George, can you sort your evidence chronologically? He's like, of course you can. Of course you could, right? I didn't know that. So to watch a word develop over time, or find like Keriana. When does Keriana occur before Islam? And in what context does that word occur? It's absolutely amazing. So the first thing I love about Symtho is this sort of needle in a haystack quality and the instant gratification you get. Yesterday, my undergraduate seminar, I had them read some of Adam Becker's wonderful book, The Fear of God. And he has a discussion in there of, the use of certain words. And I can tell them, man, Adam must have spent forever trying to track this word across time and place. And you can do it so fast. So I just love that. So I like the second thing I want to talk about is this needle in a haystack quality, but it relates to specific needles. Now, I'm sure that many of you know about and love the Biblia Patristica and the wonderful website Biblia Index, which allows you to sort of look at any verse in the Bible and then find out where it occurs in a huge number of Greek and Latin patristic authors. And I have dreamed for a long time of having something like Biblia Index or Biblia Patristica for Syriac. And now with Symtho, you sort of have it. You have a workaround. So you can take any verse in the Bible you're interested in and seeing how it's referred to by Syriac authors and type in a few words from it and to see what occurs. So this morning I was interested in Jeremiah 27. The Lord deceived me and I was deceived, which is an interesting verse. And like Origen talks about it. And it's sort of a fascinating verse. And I typed it into Symtho. It only occurs twice, and at least in the Symtho corpus as it is right now. It occurs in Jeremiah 20. Symtho catches that, and Bar Bahlul also has it. But I'm sure as the corpus increases, I know, George, this is only version 2.0. 3.0 is going to come. You might be able to find more of that verse and Syriac authors discussing it. And so in terms of the history of exegesis, it's absolutely wonderful. It's phenomenal to be able to do this sort of exegetical history, tracking certain verses. I think it's really, really wonderful. Related to this is the ability to look for intertexts and allusions. Do you want to see if this author is quoting Ephraim or quoting Jacob, or is this person from the Church of the East, is he aware of something from a different tradition? So you can really start finding intertexts and allusions really quickly, and which is phenomenal. The fourth thing I like about Symtho is it can help you get better at Syriac. And so you might be reading, this is a very basic usage of it, but I think it's really important. You might be reading something and come across a word you hadn't seen before. I didn't know, and you want to see more usages of it. So back in the day, what you would do is you look it up in the Thesaurus Syriacus in the Compendious Dictionary. You look it up in Brockelmann, and they'd give you little excerpts and little examples. And that was sort of your evidence. Now with Symtho, you can get 100 usages of it, and you can study it, and you can sort of see. In Arabic they say "Tikrayu alam al-himar," like repetition teaches the donkey. You can see it a bunch of different times, and seeing it so many times, it'll teach you what it means and sort of internalize it. So I love that about it. So yes, it can give you a sense for a word. And related to that is another thing I think about Symtho that's amazing is it's going to revolutionize Syriac lexicography. So it holds out the possibility for making something like the OED, the Oxford English Dictionary for Syriac. Again, you can search for a word, sort it chronologically, and watch across time and space how this word changes and develops its meanings. And you can get a sort of comprehensiveness which has not been possible to this point. I remember years ago at Oxford, when in Sebastian's class, he said that the Thesaurus Syriacus can serve as an index to Syriac literature up until, say, some point in the 19th century, which is true. But now we have an index of Syriac literature to the 21st century. It incorporates all these texts that have been published since the Thesaurus was published. And again, a lot of stuff in manuscript. So it's just absolutely amazing. And what else I like about Symtho is it's going to revolutionize not just lexicography, but also grammar. So people like George who understand grammar really well, and people who don't understand grammar really well, you can sort of use Symtho to look for, if you come across a strange construction, do a search. And if something looks funny to you once, but you want to see it 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 times and how it's used, you learn what this person, what it means, what a construction means. So I think it holds out the possibility to really revolutionize Syriac grammar. But also, if you're reading a text, someone once said the best commentary on a text is a concordance. And so now if you come across some passage in an author, you don't know what that person means, use Symtho, find how this person uses it across his corpus, and you've got a great sense for it. And finally, this is the most esoteric, but I'm going to put this out there. I would love to see someone write a book in Syriac on Syriac particles, not unlike Deniston's book on Greek particles. And I think with Symtho, you can do a study, because I think the most difficult thing in any language is to understand its particles, or one of the most difficult things. And you could really do a study of Syriac particles using Symtho, which sounds esoteric, but I think to really get the flavor of a language, that's like the highest level of understanding its nuances, you get the particles and the prepositions. And Symtho, I think, could help really unlock that key. You can write a Deniston now for Syriac, which I think is really exciting, but I've been in school too long, so things like particles excite me. Anyway, so that's what those are my things I love about Symtho. It's amazing. And I think that as people understand how to use the tool, how powerful it is, the applications will just be phenomenal. And so thanks so much to all the Symtho team. And I'll pass the floor to Hannah now.
Yeah, thank you. I would strongly echo everything that's just been said. I'll try not to repeat any of it. But I told George recently how much I love Symtho, and I use it, multiple times a day, every single day. It's quickly becoming one of the first drop-down options in my browser. I think that the thing that I like most about it is the number of different kind of filter options and attribute options. Like Shelby was talking about all the different attributes and metadata by which you can search. And that's just so helpful for creating very specific concordances and very specific corpora to answer very specific questions. And sometimes just having those options in front of you will make you think of a certain search that you wouldn't have thought of otherwise. So it's very clear that the design that went into this was very thoughtful and done by people who know what kinds of things people are looking for. Just a couple of examples of things that I've been using a lot recently. So I love that you can narrow the corpus from which you're searching to things that are done, for example, in translation. I've been spending a lot more time with the Pshito recently than I usually have. And so often if I'm going and looking through a passage and reading, I'll come across a word that feels a little weird, or I'll wonder why it's there, what exactly it means. And so I'll go and look at the underlying Hebrew or Greek, and I'll think, that's a very interesting correspondence or a very interesting rendering, right? So then I can go and search for that word in Symtho and narrow to texts that are in translation and see, okay, what kinds of words does this tend to render? And I can see if this particular correspondence is a one-off kind of oddity, or if there are particular contexts in which that's done. And that's just a really helpful sort of tool. And then of course I can, as others have said, sort across time and across particular geographies or authors or translators to try to see what different techniques and ideas about translational correspondences might be relevant here. The other thing that I really, really love is the ability to generate collocations and also search for collocations. It's so very helpful. So I've been reading some really obscure, abstract, convoluted philosophical passages recently that can be really difficult to understand. But sometimes you'll see that 2 words are always cropping up in kind of the same context, right? So a recent example was miathruso, virtue, and nidato, knowledge. They were always coming up together in the same places in this one author that I was reading. So you can go and you can do a search for one of those words and then filter your search to only passages that also include the second word within a certain proximity. And that can be really helpful to see which other passages might pair these things together. So you can start to trace some of the trends of these kinds of thoughts and ideas that get paired together with different thinkers. But if I don't already have one of these collocations in mind, a thing that is really fun is that Symtho will provide a list of collocations, right? So you can search for a word and then go to the collocations and it'll say which words appear most frequently in proximity to that word. So you can, from there, start to trace out kind of a mental, kind of conceptual map for a given, text or author or corpus and see what kinds of concepts tend to go together. So yeah, I think others have mentioned this, but I've had professors in like Greek and Latin classes in the past who reflected on how much slower the pace of scholarship was before there were readily accessible text searching tools. So I'm really excited now to see, what kinds of work are possible now that we have something like this for Syriac. And I'm really grateful to you all for your work.
Thank you very much, everyone. And now we will move to the question and answer section. You can type your questions in the chat, and I will read the question, and maybe I'll ask one of the participants to answer it, depending on what the question is, because most of the times I will not know how to answer the question. So the first question comes from Oliver Sliwa. Does it, I guess he's referring to the OCR, does it recognize diacritics or only the letters in handwritten texts? Maybe Abby, you want to answer that question?
Yeah, sure. So in handwritten text, when we were using transcribers to train the models, we did train it to recognize diacritics. But unfortunately, it is always the thing that it is always the thing to be transcribed incorrectly the most. Yeah, it's the hardest thing to get right. I think particularly the dotted diacritics, which can be mistaken for punctuation quite easily by the OCR. And I think that's the reason for when I showed the result, you would see that eSyriac was a few % less than Symtho, and that was a few % less than eStrangler. And I think that is due to the diacritics. But yeah, it can be trained to recognize them. But yeah, unfortunately, they're less accurate than the letters are.
Thank you, Abby. The next question is actually addressed to Slavo. I don't know if you see it, Slavo. From John Chen. I'm very interested in the tagging system you use for individual Syriac words. Is there an established system for it like used in BibleWorks Hebrew texts?
Can anybody hear me?
Yes.
Thank Jesus. Well, no, there is not, because that's kind of the problem here. So there's a whole lot more grammatical studies that have been done on biblical Hebrew than there are on Syriac. Remember, in some aspects, we're only starting with computational linguistics regarding Syriac, and there's also the question of it's not only a question of describing the system well, but also to assign the annotations to basically come up with a tagging system that would work for this particular language. So obviously, we can take our cues from biblical Hebrew, we can take our cues from Arabic, even other Semitic languages like Maltese, for example. But ultimately, we kind of have to agree on something that works for everybody and that works for Syriac and that the computers can handle well. And there's a whole lot of work in that being still involved. But we're working on this, and hopefully we'll have within the next few months a workable suggestion. Now, there are people who have already done a lot of work. One of the examples that I've shown you was from the Gregory project at I think the Louvain University. There's some issues that I have with what they've done. And also one important part is that they do not make their work freely available, which is a big no-no in computational linguistics, especially nowadays. So one has to find a balance between all the interests.
Thank you, Slavo. The next question from Isa Al-Masri is, what do you mean by regular expressions? So allow me to share the screen. So basically, let's do a search here, and let's go to advanced, and we'll go to phrase, which gives you regular expressions. So I showed you can type you can type Melko, which gives you king, for example, right? Okay, now I can come back here, change it, and I'm going to add in English square brackets. So anything in square brackets means or. So this means one of these 4 letters, these are the Badul prefixes, followed by Melko. So if I do this, I'm gonna get Umelko, Dimelko, and so on and so forth. And there's so many other things you could do with regular expressions. I can come here and I can say, give me any word that starts with any letters, let's say with meme or tau. It begins, and then after it we have kof, and Slavo, how do I say many things? Can I put, no, you can't put star here. You can put it.
Plus. Are you looking for plus?
Yeah, plus. Yeah, that means, oh, I need to put any character plus dot, correct?
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, so
at least one character, and it can be any character.
Yeah, so the disjunction here means either meme or tau, followed by kof, followed by the dot any character, plus means one or more any other characters. And this will give me words like this. There's the meme, the kof, and then one or more any other characters. So so basically there are videos and there are tutorials. We can maybe send a follow-up email with places, tutorial kind of sites for regular expressions. This is the sort of thing that you could do, but because we know many people don't know how to do it now, we kind of did a builder for you. So if I want to say qtal and give me perfect verbs from qtal, this button here will create the regular expression for you, and you can look at it simply to learn from it. So this says, give me qof, teith, lomath, followed by any of these, waw, youth, tau, or noon, and this means 1 to 3. That means 1 to 3 occurrences of these suffixes. So this will give you qtal, tun, tau, waw, noon, and so on and so forth. See, here's qtal tun, here's qtal.
It should be said here that this is a very rough tool.
Yes.
So it will give you examples that may not make sense grammatically. So don't judge it too harshly. But it certainly is helpful in providing an overview of what you can get.
And regular expressions are just general computing. In Microsoft Word, it's called wildcard searches. You could do global search and replace on patterns. For example, I wrote a program that adds rukoho and kushoyo points with search and replace regular expressions. Of course, they were in the hundreds and they had to be done in a specific order. So I put them in a spreadsheet, and I basically wrote a program that reads each search and replace and does the search and replace. It used to take me, for the Antioch Bible, 3 to 4 months to point just the rukoho kushoyo points of a book like Isaiah or Chronicles. And after 5 books, I said, this is crazy. I'm not doing this. So I spent about a month developing this, and now it does it in 5 minutes. Of course, I have to proofread it and fix it, but that's what you can use regular expressions for. So let me see what the next question is. So can you search across a number of specific authors of interest using your own regular expressions? Yes. So you can do regular expressions and filter that even further by author or by genre. Maybe you only want verse, poems, or maybe you want prose text, or maybe you only want texts that are translated from other languages or translated from Greek only, in combination with regular expressions. Yes, you could do that. Another question. Can we list the results according to date? For instance, can we search for Ruko and search for, yeah, exactly. You could do the search and then you could go and say order it by this field or by that field. So I see Slavo going there, and he's going to show you
so
how to do that.
This is basic sorting. This is the text types. Okay, so there are all kinds of things that are displayed in the interface, so we need to play around with it. Maybe we can organize like a training session at a later point.
To the simple one you did, and you use epoch, it will do it.
Yes, exactly. So here's what I'm going to. So right now, only the document ID is displayed. But if we change the display here, well, you can't see it on the screen, but here, if I hover over it, you'll see that the year is also displayed over here.
Yeah.
So
and if you go to the simple one you went to before, you could use document epoch as the sorting, and then it will sort it by that.
Yes, precisely. So what you can even do is go like this, simple one, and then use the text types, which is this is an inaccurate name. Basically, text types here means metadata, and there you can. Where's epoch? Ah, there we go. There it is. And then you can select it if you're just interested in a particular era. So let's say before 400, and you get the results that are only appear before 400, and there's only 2 of these. Oh, the festal letter of Athanasius. Well, interesting. There are multiple ways in which the metadata can be displayed, in which it can be queried, in which it can be sorted on. There's, of course, the usual frequency thing, which has always been my favorite thing, although here it will actually not help us. But it requires a certain familiarity with the interface.
Yeah. So next question is, well, it's a comment. We're making this so much easier. Will this make scholars more lazy and not read texts? Well, that's that's on everybody, I guess. There is a question from Ali. Are scribal mistakes corrected in Symtho? I'll talk about that in the concluding remarks. Yeah. And Erica Hunter, can it be used for proper names? Yes, it can be used for proper names, and hopefully when part of speech tagging is there, maybe it will be easier to search on proper names as a tag, and then you limit your search on that. Are there any other questions? You can type in the chat. And if we don't have any other questions, we can move to my concluding remarks. Here's the question, Azad. Is there user documentation available? Slavo, do you want to say something? I believe the platform has videos and...
Yes, there are videos, there are links. There's... I'm going to send... we can send an email with links to that, but the entire platform actually has... So if you look here, right away in the concordance tab, there's a video which provides basic user information. And then there are, for example, here there are always question marks where you can hover over them, and they will provide links. So here you can find out about what text types actually do. You can see right away here the address of the company that actually makes this. Please don't be confused between Sketch Engine and no Sketch Engine. They basically have the same interface, only the functionality behind is much more advanced for the Sketch Engine. But the fundamental principles apply to both. So you can actually find out just about anything, even if you go here for the user guide.
So thank you, Slavo. Isa asks, will the recording be available? Yes, we will make it available in a week or so after the session. Tom Schmidt asks a question, will the text in Symtho be shared with the digital Syriac corpus? So our texts, you don't see the full text because this is a search engine on Symtho, but our texts are available to anybody who requests them for, any research that you want. And we're already talking to Jamie about how to sync our texts with the digital Syriac corpus. In fact, Zabine and I, was it last year, Zabine? I can't remember. We applied for a grant for the project, and one portion of that project was developing the syncing mechanism between Symtho and the digital Syriac corpus. Unfortunately, we didn't get that grant. So that means the intention is still there. Because there is no grant for that, it's a matter of finding the time to do it. But the question is, yes, at some point when somebody will get to it.
Let me just add to that.
Yeah, Slavo maybe can add something about workflow.
Let me just add to that there's definitely the intention. Basically, the project that I'm working on in Vienna, the Hunanen project, was set up with this like a dual way of approaching the texts. So there's one interface for reading them, the other interface for analyzing them. And we also use the no sketch engine. And this is also the intention for the digital Syriac corpus and Symtho to be connected in that way. So basically that you can, at any point while reading the text in the digital Syriac corpus, just click over to Symtho and do it the other way around, providing, of course, there are no licensing issues. So yes, we definitely plan to integrate the both projects. Unfortunately, there's a bunch of hurdles in the way, and there's a whole lot of work that needs to be done. So give me grant money now. Give me grant money. Give me grant money.
Yes, and also we always keep that in the back of our minds whenever we're doing metadata or other stuff. We already began collecting metadata on copyright. I know that we always say that text from ancient text cannot be copyrighted by anybody, but at our end, we're not ready to go into fights with publishers. So in our metadata, we're already collecting which books are out of copyright, which books are within copyright, so that when the time comes to write scripts to push things, let's say to the digital Syriac corpus or to any other platform, maybe they will say, give us everything, but don't give us things that are within copyright, then we can automatically do that. So we already began this work. Christian Heel, is there a list of the texts that are included? What are your text acquisition principles? Are you focusing on particular genres or periods? So if you go to the screen that Shelby told you, corpus info, and click on the metadata, and you click on works, basically you will see the list of every single work that is in the database. We used in data acquisition, our principle was to go for bigger collections and then go to smaller collections. So we started with the major series in our fields. So we scanned books from major series in our fields, and we've done those. Whenever I say we've done it, that should explain that should mean 90% we've done it. Probably we've missed things, or some books were difficult to scan, or we couldn't find them. So major series that you can think of are already in Symtho. That was in the first beta, and all publications of Gorgias that were typed, new publications of Gorgias, even if they were based on other editions, all of these were in the first beta that we launched at SBL 2 years ago, or almost 2 years ago. In this second beta version, beta 2, we included all Gorgias reprints that are in Estrangula and East Syriac. So if Gorgias reprinted the book, and it was very surprising to us that when that the Gorgias body of books, including reprints, is double the size of the corpus that's published by the major other series. So double of that. That was a shock to me. So all of that is there, but Symtho is not there. Brandon now is working on the Symtho Gorgias reprints. Symtho models were more difficult to do. So now we are working on that. And next we are working on the 2,000 books that we digitized at Beth Mardutho with Princeton Theological Seminary. So as you can see, we're going with big collections that are kind of available to us in PDF format. And then from there, it's going to be a bit, you know, once you hit 20 million, 25 million, I think the acquisition is going to become slower. We announced that we now have a team of people who can type from manuscripts. So if anybody has a manuscript that would like it typed, please, you know, send it to us. We can do that. So we're going to start selecting one manuscript of unpublished work. If the work is published, we will go with the publication. If the work is not published, we will go with one manuscript. And I was going to announce this in the concluding remarks. We have now 2 area advisors or editors that agreed to work with us, Jack Tannous and Ephraim Ishaq. Jack is going to go through the Syriac literature meticulously in some sort of a methodology and see what are the things that are missing in Symtho. And then we will go after those. So he's going to cover up to the Barabroyo, the Renaissance. And then Ephraim Ishaq is going to cover 2 things. He's going to cover the 2nd millennium up to Ktobonoyo, but also he is going to cover liturgical texts, all periods. Jack won't be worrying about the liturgical texts. So anaphoras and fanqitos and khudras and both Church of the East, Syriac Orthodox, but also the Melkite, Chalcedonian tradition. So Ephraim will be going that. So basically, they will come to us and say, here's a PDF or here's a manuscript that you guys need to do. And I am very happy to announce that we are beginning a new project called Symtho. Maybe Shelby, we can go to that screen on the slides. And this will answer this question, but also will answer the question about will you be correcting texts. Initially, we were not planning on correcting text because it is too much work. But unfortunate, the economic and political situation in the Middle East is very horrendous to the local people. But we are trying in this new project to put a spin on it, a positive spin on it. The dollar is so strong, ridiculously strong, that even without having funding, by relying on funds from individuals as low as $100 per month, we are able to hire folks who can work full-time and give them very interesting and very generous salaries, local salaries, which to us living in Europe and living in America is pennies. It is nothing. So we could do 2 things. Project Symtho, and thanks to Mor Polycarpos for picking the word, Symtho has 2 meanings. It means support, but it also means supporter. So one can become a Symtho, can become a supporter by donating. We have a web page here, bethmardutho.org/Symtho, where you can co-adopt with somebody else, because we don't want to put more burden than $100 a month on one person or one family. Of course, we're not talking to students here. We're talking to people with jobs. By providing as little as that, you can support an entire family, or 2-3 people can support an entire family in the Middle East. And we had a meeting last week where we hired a project manager now in the Middle East, and we identified 3 Malfone, and we are going to go for 10-15 Malfone. And we're going to be giving them the texts so that they correct the OCR, any mistakes in the OCR. They can type text that we don't have. Of course, we want the political situation to become better, and maybe at some point we cannot do that if if life becomes good for people, good, that's great. We don't need to do that, but we would like to make use of this period of time to support the people, and at the same time they work on their own heritage, so it gives them pride of their own heritage, and us as consumers, we can have more texts. So please go ahead to that webpage, bethmardutho.org.sumco. Maybe Shelby, you can put it in the chat, and if you're able, we ask you to adopt folks. We don't have any governmental funding or NEH funding or any of that. Everything that you see is done by the volunteers that appeared on the screen now, and also again with the Cybele Fellowship, the Mary Cybele Fellowship, and the families that support our summer programs. Another question is it possible to search? Oh, it disappeared from my screen. Where did it go? Is it possible to search by using transliteration romanization terms? I don't believe so at this point.
One would have to add that information. It should not be difficult, but again, the question is whether that's something we want, whether it makes sense to have.
Yeah. And the next question is, Symtho covers any liturgical traditions? From liturgical texts, currently we don't have anything, although Ephraim sent us many, and I have Shimo, and I think we may have the Khudra, I'm not sure. We didn't have time to tag them and add them, but our intention is to add the liturgical text from all traditions. Did I miss any questions? I'm not sure. Can Jack or anyone else speak further about how they use Symtho for intertextual studies? For example, I am interested in intertext between Syriac and early Islamic literature. Jack, do you want to take that?
So I haven't used it for this topic specifically, but I could see it being put to great use. So for example, Sean Anthony has a recent book about the Prophet Muhammad. And when he was writing that, I remember I talked to him, maybe I saw him at Notre Dame or someplace, and he was interested in this expression, the keys of paradise or something, and trying to find references that in Syriac literature. I remember I hunted around and I found a reference to it in a dialogue poem that Sebastian had published in Hugoye. But again, that took some time, and that was just me finding that. Now with Simtho, you could do that search really fast and find probably more than what I found. Think of someone like Yossi Witztum and his really excellent dissertation on the Quran and its Syriac milieu. You could go through and find sort of certain words in the Quran's retelling of biblical stories and just play around with those words and their Syriac equivalents, and see if you can find sort of the same sort of thing that Yossi Witztum spent years. I watched him do it. He spent years reading through huge amounts of Syriac in Firestone Library and finding these connections. With a little using Sebastian and George's English Syriac dictionary, you can sort of reverse engineer and do some of that stuff much more quickly. I can imagine that. And again, if you find certain hadith or certain sort of Islamic texts which sound like they might be talking to a non-Muslim source, again, play around with Symtho. You might be able to find some of these traditions also in Syriac literature. So I haven't done it specifically, use this thing. I'm supposed to have an article that I owe Gabriel Reynolds and Nikolai Zinahe. It's like over a year overdue, on John the Baptist in the Quran. But before I send it off to them, I might play around with this a little bit and see if I can find any more Syriac kind of parallels between that material. Anyway, so there's enormous potential here, again, for this sort of needle in a haystack type searches, a little bit of elbow grease and thinking, you can maybe find some very interesting stuff. I imagine you can find a lot of interesting stuff.
Thank you, Jack. Shelby, I don't know if I know we came to this slide because Sumco slide because I asked you for. Was there a slide before it for me? I can't remember. On the what's next, maybe we can go to the first of the what's next slides. Is that it, Shelby? All right. Also, here we have. So, what's next for us to do? While we get other questions, I will tell you a bit about that. Slavo talked about the part of speech tagging. So, we hope that will be in the next release, or maybe 2 releases from now. We're also starting a database of unpublished texts. You see here contributions by Sebastian, Ephraim Eshaq, Jack Tannous, myself. There are a few other people who are adding to this database. They're identifying texts that have never been published so that we can start typing them through the Symtho project that I mentioned in the Middle East. And I talked already about the area editors. So if we go to the next slide now, is the Symtho slide, I think. So again, after Symtho slide, yeah. So Symtho again, you know, this is an opportunity for us to build the project with staff. You know, volunteers can do a lot, but we can't expect the volunteers to do full-time work, and that's why we're doing the Symtho project in the Middle East. Another question came: will Symtho cover Gershuni? No, it will not cover Gershuni, simply because Gershuni is another language, and then you know that you I mean, there is no sense in searching with another language, unless of course we can tag it, and you always have to go and turn on the Gershuni tag. It would be best to have a parallel project for Gershuni. We don't promise to do that, but everything that we've learned is available. If somebody wants to come up and say, you know, I want to start a Gershuni parallel thing, you know, most definitely we'll give you anything that we have. A similar question would be Neo-Aramaic. In fact, we digitized by mistake a few Neo-Aramaic Nena dialect publications by Bejan and others. When we found them, of course, we took them out, but we're not throwing them, we're keeping them. Slavo has particular interest in Nena dialects, and you know, and I know Shabo is on the call and he's interested. If you know, folks want to do something like this for Nena, these texts, we can give them these texts, but also again, the platform, our experience is available for anybody who wants to do something like this for any other language. All right, so does Symtho refer to modern foreign languages or only to old ones like Hebrew and Greek? We don't refer to other languages, but basically, you know, we tell you if the text is translated from Hebrew or from Greek, you know that from the metadata, and you can filter your metadata based on that.
There are other resources, other similar corpora for modern languages, which also use the no-sketch engine. So,
oh yes, yeah.
For example, I'm putting up one, and there's also this one. So our colleagues in Prague and all over Europe actually put together similar corpora for modern languages, also for some ancient languages. There's one for Latin and Greek, but this is purely Syriac project, of course.
Yeah, and Slava put a link for a Nena corpus Aramaic that he's working on. All right, any other questions from anyone else? Does any of the folks on the panel would like to say anything before we close?
If I can make a comment here, Symtho is of course only a beginning. A whole lot of things that Jack and Professor Brock talked about, like for example, authorship analysis, this can be done using other tools, but using the Symtho data. So the work you've seen on the word thing tool, that's something that I have done using Python and some of those fancy new machine learning AI algorithms. And the same thing can, of course, be done for a bunch of other things. So on the HUNAnet project, for example, we're looking at the authorship analysis for the translations of Syriac translations of Greek scientific literature. So there's one thing that can be extended to basically just about anything. So if you have any idea, if you have any tips on what should be done, just let George and me know, and I'm pretty sure that can be done using the data we've collected for Symtho.
Yeah, and again, I repeat, our data, our raw data is available for anybody. This is not a closed project. This is an open access project. So I don't know if you want to do an app where you want to crunch all the data and have all the letters of the alphabet dance around Olaf. We'll give you the data and do whatever you want to do with it. So everything is available. I know there is no link to download the raw data, but just email us, say I want to do this with it, and we'll just give you everything, and you can do whatever you want. Yeah, Rocchio sent a comment. Thank you. This is a great idea, especially about the Symtho. The Symtho project is a great idea. Thank you. And then what else do we have here? Yeah, well, we have complimentary remarks. Thank you very much, everyone who are writing positive comments. Yeah, so we are coming to the close of the hour, and I would like to thank first everybody who worked on this project, all the Cybele Fellows, all the Digital Humanities Fellows, all the Princeton Theological Seminary interns, the volunteers. If you would like to be involved, please write to us. We always, we will not turn away any volunteer. You can volunteer in different ways. If you have no time to volunteer, you can support with Symtho, or you can just support by using it. Just use it, and that is the greatest support that you can give us. I would like to also thank Sebastian, Jack, and Hannah for providing us with their responses and their comments, all the speakers, and Zabine and Maria. Thank you so much for co-hosting with IAS. Zabine is working hard to support Syriac at IAS. So thank you so much, Zabine, for being open, and obviously not Syriac. Firsthand, I see how Zabine is open. Islamic studies in IAS is huge. It has Syriac and Hebrew and Samaritan and all sorts of things. So this openness is really great, Zabine. Thank you so much. So I'm going to move it to Maria. I know, Maria, I was supposed to speak last, but I don't know how to close things and say goodbye to people. So maybe you can help me do that.
George never changes. You never stop to amaze us.
No.
Thank you so much to all of you. Your effort, it's proven in what we just saw. We've heard the comments from people. Keep the good work, and let's keep this moving forward. I hope to be able to showcase the next beta. So
thank you so much.
Count me in on that one. Thank you all for attending, and those of you who join us, please keep tabs, because we are also doing other talks during the upcoming months. We have the author series. So you'll see the announcements on that.